think we're recording yet, so we're just gonna have to wait.
There we go.
Okay.
We're on. It's good.
Yeah, start at the top. You got it. What? She's got it.
Sure, I'll say something.
Alright,
Very
now
good.
for us.
Okay, sure. So in Esther, chapter 3, verses 1 through 6, it talks about how Mordecai resisted the king's commands and how he was a Jew, and that kind of caused religious conflicts between them, because then he decided to plot to destroy all the Jews since Mordecai was a Jew. He resisted him.
That's good, that's good, I agree. I agree. I see the difference there. What about you?
Okay.
Oh yeah, we were good.
In Ruth, religious differences are kind of changed, or you can redeem somebody even if they're a different religion. So in Ruth 4, 9 through 12, they have the whole process of Boaz redeeming Ruth because she's a Moabite and they're not. So despite her difference, they kind of cover that up.
Okay.
I thought it was interesting how Ruth and Esther both have to kind of conceal part of their identities in order to make a better life for themselves. Because in chapter 1 of Ruth, verses 16 through 18, when she's begging Naomi to let her come with her back to Judah, she says my God will, or your God will be my God, and she's willing to practice another or follow another God to, I guess, make a better life for herself. And then Esther has to do the same thing. She has to hide that she's Jewish from the king, because in chapter 2 of Esther, verse 10, her brother Mordecai tells her not to show that what the people she follows and what religion.
Yeah, not to show her people.
Yeah.
Not to tell them who her people is.
Yeah.
So can anyone relate this to a past passage that we've read of someone trying to hide their identity? Maybe back in the Bible. Somebody who was king, Pharaoh.
Moses.
Alright. Yes. We can relate that together, right? Cool. Do you guys have anything to add? Should I come back?
You come back.
What about you, Dan?
So I just going back to Esther. I like what Kyle was talking about, how the idea of Mordecai not bowing down to Haman caused a conflict. You see how it affects Haman in chapter 3, verse 11, verse 6 actually. Haman caused to destroy all the Jews, the people. Mordecai took the whole kingdom. So he's obviously really taken aback by this sense of indecency that was shown to him by Mordecai. And then chapter 7, when he ends up assaulting Esther in the same way, that's something, I don't think he would have done in that scenario if he wasn't so angry with Mordecai. And you can see that anger affected him in a way that caused him to do a lot of negative things, and ultimately ended up taking his own life because of it.
Interesting. And it kind of amazes me how someone, evil or whatever can cause a man to take his own life. Like the situations are just crazy. Do you have anything to add on that, Greg?
Another example of that is at the end of in Esther, at the end of chapter 4, verse 15 to the end. It's just more of the same of that type of abuse. I mean, when they decide to go on the fast and then go into the king's chambers, go into the king's hall, and not worry about if they're going to be killed or not. It's just more of the same type of abuse that Dan's talking about.
Yeah. And it's crazy because every story that we hear about tragedies is always about the Jews. Because to me, this sounds just like another Holocaust. Does anyone else agree?
Speaking of that, I went to the Holocaust Museum in DC this Thanksgiving, and I saw the history of anti-Semitism. And here in Esther, like chapter 2, verse 20, and how Esther has not revealed her kindred of her people as Mordecai had charged her. And it's kind of similar to how the Jewish people had to hide their blood because they have blood tests and all that, just to identify Jews and all that. So, they have to anti-Semitism existed way back in the days in the Bible like this, and continue on not until 1960, I guess, until the Catholic Church revised their teachings, and since then Jewish people have been living better, I guess.
That's crazy. Right? Does anyone have a hypothesis on why the Jews keep getting targeted?
It's in the Holocaust Museum that Jews were blamed for the Jesus. So that's why the Catholic Church keeps that's why Jewish people have been living in the minority all over the planet in the past. The Catholic Church keeps victimizing the Jewish people.
Right. Yeah, I can definitely see where they come from. Does anyone else have anything to add?
So I don't think it's necessarily a different religion interacting, but I was just flipping through my notes from when we were going over the Hebrew Bible earlier this year, and then in Joshua book 9, verse 18, it says, it's talking about the Gibeonites and the Israelites, and it says, but the Israelites did not attack them because the leaders of the congregation had sworn to them by the Lord, the God of Israel, that they wouldn't. So I think the Gibeonites worshiped different people or had different values, and so there was tension between the Israelites and the Gibeonites. But how they ended up interacting was they ended up tolerating each other for just a few verses and until Jericho later. So
Definitely. Does anyone see any different stories? Can you see how there's difference from other stories in the Bible?
In the first book of Samuel, chapter 23, verses 1 through 4, it talks about how David asked Yahweh if they should go and attack the Philistines. And it kind of differs from the point I brought up earlier about the king and Mordecai, with him being a Jew, because in this instance Yahweh intervenes, and David's men were afraid and didn't want to go against the Philistines, but then Yahweh was saying that they should go and that he'll give them into his hand.
Okay. So I see the Yahweh has a lot of interaction in that you bring up. But does anyone see the type of interaction that Yahweh has in Esther or Ruth?
I'll talk real quickly about that. So in Esther, Yahweh or the Lord or God is not mentioned once, unless I missed it, but I did see one time that word or any variation of it was used.
I don't think so either.
And in Ruth, we kind of have like Ruth 1:20 to 21, right? Which give me a second to find that.
It's page 391.
Right. So we have Naomi sort of recounting her the difficulty she's experienced, right? You know, the Lord has dealt harshly with me, and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me. And this is kind of reminiscent of what we just read, the book of Job, where in both cases we have two individuals who have not explicitly done anything wrong, and yet they've suffered greatly. And they attribute this to the Almighty or the Lord, that the Lord is in some way responsible for that, because Yahweh is omnipotent. This was some kind of design, right? Although it's very unclear why they are suffering. And there's kind of, I think, anguish and a little bit of resentment towards Yahweh for that, right? And this is remarkably different from like Exodus, right? Where Yahweh is directly communicating with people, in that case Moses, right? Yahweh's will is pretty clear cut. It's stated what he wants Moses to do. It's stated how he wants Moses to do it, right? In the cases of Naomi or Job, they are experiencing Yahweh's will, but they don't know why. They don't know what for. And that kind of difference between them is kind of confusing. You might ask, why is it that Yahweh, although might still be involved in these stories, and in Esther, it seems that it's significantly less transparent, right?
Yeah, definitely, because I thought I was tripping when I was reading. I thought I missed it, had to go back. But, yeah, you could definitely see, I guess you could say that God just lets it play out here. I mean, I seen how Mordecai took off his clothes and stuff. We saw that earlier in the Bible. So I don't know if that has anything to do with Yahweh, but I guess that's part of the tradition. Did anyone see anything interesting that they thought was weird or out of place, or just that caught your eye?
I was going to go back to Towns' point about how Naomi kind of relies on, or like kind of or she kind of like relies on God and like kind of blames stuff on him like in verses 20 through 21 when the Lord has, or when she says the Lord has dealt harshly with me, but she also like kind of has like a different perspective on him in the end when Ruth has a baby with Boaz, and in verse or chapter 4 verse 13 she says, or somebody tells her that the Lord has granted her with grandchildren. So I guess like after the blame that she's put on the Lord, like she's able to like forgive him, I guess.
Forgive God.
Or just like not, or she thinks that like her good luck has come from him, or like that's like what she wants from him, I guess.
Okay. Alright. Well,
Connor wanted to.
Oh, one
God.
thing that came out, like stood out to me was chapter. It's chapter 9, verse 16. It said the rest of the Jews, those in the king's provinces, likewise mustered and fought for their lives. They disposed of their enemies, killing 75,000 of their foes, and they did not lay hands on the spoil. And that just reminded me of the fall of Jericho, about how Yahweh made it forbidden to take any of the spoil from their enemies, and I just thought it was interesting how they all remain virtuous and follow his law, and he doesn't come into the story. It was just different from Jericho, where they are all punished for one person taking one of the spoils.
Okay. You wanna add anything?
Well, this is kind of just meta, but I think it's interesting seeing where some of these names come from, like popular names, like in Western society, like Ruth and Esther. It's like stuff like that. Like it's come from here, and like how names like let's see, like Eliphaz and Bildad and Zophar are here because like they're portrayed as like bad people in these stories, and so people name themselves after prominent figures. Done well. And also, what the origin for Purim was, because I didn't know. So now I know. So
Well, what is it?
all of Esther. Like, what?
Esther means pure?
What? No, the holiday of Purim. It's a Jewish one.
Purim is a Jewish holiday that celebrates Esther's role in overcoming the enemies of Haman and his enemies, and this is the Jewish people celebrate this in March. It's a springtime festival, and if you're interested, next semester we can celebrate Purim. Okay, there's baked goods that are associated with this, noisemakers, all kinds of things. It is a celebratory sort of spring festival among the Jewish peoples, sort of recognizing Purim.
Go to Tim's house.
What's that?
We can go
Is
visit
that-
Tim.
We're gonna go to Tim's house. Okay,
Yeah.
fantastic.
Is that what they're talking about in Esther chapter 9, line 18, or verse 18? Is that where they're talking about the gifts that they give on 14th today? Is that the,
It is. I mean, this is, you can see in the notes here that this is the inauguration of the Feast of Purim. Okay. So this is the holiest holidays in the Jewish calendar tend to come in the fall. I remember that the Jewish calendar is lunar, but they tend to come in the fall. And then, there are other festivals throughout the day, including, of course, the Passover, which is in the spring and so on. But this is one that Purim is it's a happy festival. It's one of celebration. And it's has some hamantashen. Right? These are the characteristic baked goods that are associated with this. We'll all have to bring noisemakers to class, all that sort of thing, okay? And when everybody says the name Haman, everybody has to boo, and there's noisemakers and all that sort of thing. That's quite fun.
So it's
Okay. Well,
Can I interject just a few things here that you have identified that I just can't stop, I can't keep back any longer, and this is one of the things where we see here the question of anti-Semitism, and I think this is a really important moment for us to look at this, is that the anti-Semitism predates the Jesus movement, right? That anti-Semitism gets a shot in the arm, if you will, from Eusebius in particular, this historian of the early Jesus movement, that identifies the cause and effect relationship between the destruction or the outcome of the Jewish wars in the 1st century CE as a consequence of of how the Jewish people treated Jesus, right? So Eusebius makes this connection between what happened in the Jewish wars and the fall of the Jewish resistance and the deaths and the massacres that followed that as retribution for what they did to Jesus as a part of the Jesus movement. So that obviously then spurs anti-Semitism into as Christianity takes root and as it becomes. But it's also that there was not the same kind of anti-Semitism in the Islamic culture, because Islam viewed Jesus not as the son of Yahweh, but as a prophet, one of the prophets. So we see anti-Semitism. So let's look in particular at Esther 3:8, because this is the origins, not just of anti-Semitism, but of racism in general and ethnic conflict. Where Haman says to the king, "There is a certain people scattered and separated among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom, and their laws are different from those of other people. And they do not keep the king's laws, so that it is not appropriate for the king to tolerate them." And this is the origin of race. I mean, why were the Irish, the Catholic Irish, persecuted in the early part of their country? Because they were supposedly papists, right? That they took their orders from the Pope, not from civic authorities in our country. Why is there a certain degree of anti-Muslim thinking and ideas around here? Because Muslims presumably follow a different code of laws and behavior, Sharia, and that is viewed by some as a threat to our community and the kind of laws and things that they dress differently, they have different customs. So we see here really the origins of racism in general is that people who do things differently are viewed as suspect. Okay, they have not embraced the ideas of the community. Of course, then it becomes the question is, who constitutes the majority of a community, right? And we see this, for example, in Lebanon today, where Lebanon, the political configuration is based on religion. The Christians have certain political influence. The Muslims have a certain and in this we see conflicts about what code of laws, what kind of conventions are we supposed to as a community adhere to or follow. And we will see this in the Roman period too, even before the Jesus movement, where the Jewish people, their identity is such that they are to a certain extent separate from the other larger community. They do things differently. And even today, we can go into Jewish communities here in Memphis, in New York and other places where Jewish certain groups or sects of Judaism keep to themselves, right? And they are different and they live. And so that is an origin to a certain extent of racism in general. And it's one where we see Ruth, what does Ruth do? Well, Ruth assimilates, right? That's one thing, is that one gives up one religious identity and adopts another. That's one thing. Esther has a different thing. No, what we need to do is we need to allow people, we need to have a degree of tolerance and not allow other people to impose their religious views on others. It's possible to coexist peacefully. It's possible in a distributed pluralistic society for more than one, religious set of religious ideals or concepts or ideas to flourish and to exist. So we have two different ways of looking at this. You also, I thought was really interesting, you brought up the notion of where is Yahweh in all of this, right? Okay, and we saw where Ruth, on the one hand, seems to blame these forces beyond her control for what's happened to her, and then at the end she says, wow, and then Yahweh, blesses me with a grandchild and all of that sort of thing. So we do see, and this is in Job too that we saw, we didn't have a chance to talk about, but the concept of balance, right? That what happens, if bad things happen to us, then in some way we can anticipate some compensatory good things. Or if good things are happening to us, we feel very superstitious that something bad is going to happen to us. That there is a sense that we have, and I think Plato would say that there is something inherent in the operations of the cosmos that lead us to think about, that we want in kind of an Aristotelian way, we want the mean between having too many blessings and not having enough, right? We want we want a sense of balance. Well, one of the ways in which we're going to see philosophical or religious ideas to create that sense of balance is to establish the concept of an afterlife. There's no afterlife here, right? There might be some existence in some realm, but it is not connected to what's happening in our lives right now. In the Jewish ideas, there is something, of course, in the Greek world. The Greeks have conceived of an afterlife, right? And that there is, to a certain extent, some retribution for wrongdoings, and certain people have better afterlife, but not necessarily based on what they do in this life, right? The concept of the afterlife among Greeks is very different from that which we're going to see emerge as a consequence of this confluence of ideas in the Jesus movement. That the afterlife then becomes this world in which we can see the compensation, we can see the balance of the cosmos at work. If things are really terrible here, well, at least we can look forward to an afterlife, and there will be balance there. That it's the afterlife where we see the great cosmic balance, okay? And we just have to endure the terrible things that we do here. And in fact, we can even view good things that happen to us in a strange way as a test to see if we are really going to be morally virtuous and then obtain this afterlife, this rewards in the afterlife. We have no afterlife in that sense of sort of providing a way for cosmic balance yet, but that will come. That will come. So I do think this idea of you know, why am I experiencing good things or bad things, you know, here? Is there part of some sort of cosmic balance? Is this all going to even out in the end? I think is an important thing. So these are, you know, in these texts that we're looking at today are some really important concepts that we're going to wrestle with as we go on in our work and as we observe the evolution of these religious ideas and concepts. You mentioned the Holocaust, right? There is this notion of destroying an ethnicity, definitely in Esther. All of it is something in the post-exilic literature already, the notion, but we have seen that also in Joshua, right? The conquest of Canaan was all about, to a certain extent, the so-called, this notion of ethnic cleansing, of removing people from it, if not through destruction, then through removing them, right? Okay, so we have, for example, a current event is the relationship, how the United States government officially views what happened at the end of the First World War among the Armenians, right? There is the notion that there was an Armenian genocide perpetrated by the Turks, okay? Which, was it a genocide or was it a forced removal, right? The African diaspora, another example of what happens when ethnic groups become enslaved or become separated or treated unequally. I mean, this is something that we're wrestling with even today. So herein lies some of the origins of the things that we're going to that really continue to play out in our own lives, and I think that it's important that you saw that in these texts that this is something. How do we deal with people from different backgrounds? How do we deal with people? How do we interact with those who have different concepts, not just of what is right and wrong in the cosmic sense, but what one is supposed to do on a daily basis, how to dress, how to interact with one another. This is a very complex thing, and we certainly haven't solved all the problems, right? We're still wrestling with them today. And to what extent do we have to take personal responsibility for this to help shape our communities in a way that is that diffuses and that allows for the kind of tolerance that we see to a certain extent in the story of Ruth, right? I think Ruth is a beautiful story. I mean, it's to a certain extent disturbing that Ruth has to give up her whole religious thing to assimilate, but there's also in there, I think, a very beautiful story about accepting someone for who they are, and ultimately Ruth being the great-great-grandmother of David, right? It's there's something very beautiful in that in our society too, that all of these people that have come from around the world have come to this country and have, and through their descendants and through their interactions have created something really quite extraordinary. I mean, America is, for all of its faults, really a country that is further along than virtually any other country, at least those in Europe, and I think in terms of its pluralism, all of the cultural influences that have come here and that have helped create this, it really is a very unique experience and one that we can celebrate. All right, end of sermon, end of the final sermon of the semester. Thank you again for your commitment to this and for your energy in your work. I look forward to reading your third interviews and seeing how you're going to respond to the challenges of your final. But thank you, and if I hopefully will see you. But if not, have a wonderful break. Be safe. Get through the summer or the winter solstice, right, and come back for round 2.
I'll see you. Do you want me to bring this to your office later?
Yeah, that would be good. Dan, how you been? Haven't seen you around. You've been hiding from us.